I'm Alicia.
I'm Abbey.
And this is
Mystic's Guide to the Universe, your guide to practical spirituality.
Today
is the big day.
Spicy time.
The time I have been waiting for since we started doing this podcast.
And the time I have been dreading.
Yes. This is all about healing from religious trauma.
Before we get too deep into this episode, I do think it's important to throw a trigger warning right at the beginning. This was a very difficult episode for Abby and I to record. It was very difficult for me to edit. And I do think that it gets a little bit heavy at times. So if you struggle with hearing things about self-harm, religious abuse, or sexual assault, exercise caution as you continue to listen. And if anything in this episode affects you in a negative way, please reach out. We've been through it and we want to hold space for you as always. So just something to keep in mind as we continue talking about the sensitive topic.
When we talk about religious trauma, you and I specifically are coming from Christianity standpoints, right? Like,
let's be very specific though, because I don't want a blanket statement Christianity. You are coming from Southern Baptist and I am coming from Independent Fundamental Baptist.
So that's where we're coming from, but it is very important to mention that any religion or any spiritual practice can cause trauma.
Yes, even just quote spirituality, a vague spiritual leader can cause a lot of trauma.
Exactly. People that do the same things that we do can cause trauma if they use it either for personal gain or to control people or to harm people. And so as you're going on your spiritual journey, whether you are leaving a church, finding a church, or fleeing from a church like we did, it's important to make sure that you don't run from one toxic situation to another. And that's something that Abby and I have been very diligent about on our spiritual journeys, is that we literally fled cults. We don't want anything to do with that.
Right. And so today is going to be us speaking to our own experience. We're just going to talk about our journeys, what helped us, and hopefully you find some commonality with that and it helps you deal with the things that you're having to go through. Because I know there's a lot of people who hightailed it from church and now they're out there like we were, just drifting.
Floundering.
And the hardest part about walking away from church is losing the community. And even when it's not that big of a deal to you initially, you don't think about it. Once it's gone,
there's a void.
There's a huge void.
Yeah.
That broke me more than anything else. Like 22 years with these people and it was gone.
Yeah.
And so, for me, my religious trauma comes from a very fear-based belief system that I was raised in. And of course, abuse by church leaders.
Yeah. And my religious trauma comes from a very traumatic thing that happened to me. I mean, I definitely have CPTSD from my time in the Baptist church, but I definitely don't want to use this platform to trauma dump. But that being said, something incredibly traumatic, like an actual traumatic event, happened for me. And it's interesting now that I've healed. And the reason that I've been dreading this particular episode, one is because I think there's a part of me that I don't let people see.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I have been ready to let people see that. But also, I feel like I am completely healed. Most of the time going through my life, I feel like I am completely healed from my religious trauma until certain things start to pop up. And so I think I would love to start this out by talking about some of the things that we still do in our daily lives that come from religious trauma. So one of the big things for me is being a people pleaser. I am a people pleaser. This is something that I have just very recently, like within the last couple weeks since the election, I have changed. I don't care. I don't give a fuck if people like me or if people are mad at me. But for the last 36 years of my life, I had to make sure that everybody was okay and that everybody was happy with me. And
to an insane degree.
Insane. So being a people pleaser is definitely a big one for me. What's the biggest one for you?
You know what? I'm not sure. It messed up my relationship with men for a very long time.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, do you think that comes from purity culture too? Because purity culture is incredibly
toxic.
Toxic.
I did have a purity ring.
Me too. What did yours look like?
Mine was in 7th grade.
Okay.
And it was gold with an emerald and 2 side diamonds.
Oh, gorgeous. Mine was silver, or I think it was white gold actually. And it was an emerald cut sapphire, a blue sapphire.
Oh.
And it had a little tiny diamond on each side.
Nice. Yeah, so for those of you who don't know, purity culture is where a girl promises her father that she will not, and God, but specifically her father, that she will not have sex before marriage.
Mm-hmm.
And she pledges her purity to God and her father. And she gets a ring, she wears it on her ring finger, and then doesn't do anything until the wedding night.
Yeah.
And that takes a level of autonomy away from a girl.
And it's fucking creepy.
It is creepy.
For me, I think that I have a really hard time trusting myself because we were taught that we were born into sin and our hearts are deceitful and that the enemy is always lying to us. And so I think that's a lot of where my imposter syndrome comes in too, because we learned at such a young age that we are dirty and disgusting and nothing without the blood of Christ. I also feel like my religious upbringing has made me hyper vigilant too, because I always have to be aware of how my actions are affecting other people. And the concept of hell itself has made me hyper vigilant. There's always that fear. I feel like I always have to be fearful that if I do something wrong, that something bad is going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And then this is one that I'm honestly a little bit embarrassed to talk about. But we always learned that we had to save everybody. We had to evangelize and we had to preach the gospel. And so when I left the church, I had a really hard time leaving that behind. And so I felt like I had to tell everybody about my new beliefs and my new spiritual practice. And if you didn't listen to me or believe what I'm saying, you're a bad person. And it's something that just within the last couple of years, I think I finally let go of. I don't care if people don't believe what I believe. I really don't. But I did for a long time. And in my brain, I was like, how do you not see what I see? Like, listen to me. I'm trying to save you. I'm trying to get you out of a toxic situation so that you can come on the bright side. And so I was, unfortunately, I hate to say it, but I was a witch evangelist for a long time.
Oh my goodness.
I know. And I'm embarrassed about that. Another thing is perfectionism. And I know that is something that I still very much struggle with because in the church, everything was about appearances. And so everything has to be perfect. And Abby and I were just talking on the way to do this podcast that she was like, it doesn't have to be perfect. We can say, and we can, clear our throats and we can laugh and we don't have to be put together all the time. And in my head, I'm saying, okay, shut up because I'm not listening to that. Mm-hmm. But it is true. And self-hatred is a big one. I know I talked about trusting myself, but I was born a sinner. And if I don't have Jesus in my life, I have nothing. And I'm a terrible person.
The one who created you can't even look at you.
And when I go to heaven, when I die, he will turn his head and say he never knew me because I'm not a Christian. Even though he created me. So, okay, you have a bad memory, God? Cool.
Yeah.
That's on you, really.
Really?
If you can't remember making
this
me.
Sounds like a you problem.
Yeah. An all-knowing God should know who the fuck I am.
Yeah, exactly. It's the least he could do.
It really.
They raise you saying you're worthless.
Yep.
And they say it over and over and over again until you believe them.
Here's the thing that always confused me is that the church would always say that God is our Father, right?
Yeah.
But, and I already know that any Christians listening to this are going to say, well, you can't think about God in such a human way. But if God is supposed to represent our Father, imagine if our actual dads treated us the way that God treats us. If we don't obey him, he's going to kill us or throw us in a pit of fire. He would go to jail. If God is our Father, he's an abusive father. And I think that was a really hard thing for me to come to terms with too.
That was the first step away for me.
Let's talk about the warning signs of spiritual abuse so that people can be aware if they're experiencing spiritual trauma.
Are they trying to separate you from people who love you and want what's best for you?
Do they not let you think outside of their box?
Yes. Are they claiming to be absolute truth?
That's the big one. Do they think that they are the only ones that have the right answer?
Yes.
Because I know that was a big one for me growing up. We thought that only Southern Baptists had the right answer. Even other Baptists, we thought you guys were going to hell.
Oh, yeah. We for sure did not think Southern Baptists knew what they were doing.
Right. But we had the only truth.
Yes.
And, the Catholics.
Oh, don't even get me started on the Catholics.
Right.
Yeah. We had entire classes on why Catholics weren't Christians.
They weren't born again. Like a splash of water on the head at birth doesn't save you.
Right.
Okay, so if they're not letting you explore or ask questions, or even if they're not letting you leave for a while and then come back,
Or they want your money.
or yeah, that's a big one.
Yeah.
Did you learn that it's all about joy, Joy, Jesus, others, yourself? So you always had to put yourself. It was Jesus first, then others, then yourself.
I don't think joy was a long enough word for how far back you should put yourself. So, like, they just, it was more like the alphabet. Like, you come after Z.
Yeah. That's something that is still so scary to me. Learning my entire childhood that no matter how far you stray, you can be a witch, you can be a prostitute, you can be the scum of the earth, a drug dealer, a murderer, but Jesus is always there waiting in the wings. And I even had this conversation with one of my family members a few weeks ago. And she said, the only thing that's getting me through is knowing that Jesus is waiting to pull you back. And if he gets in, if you let him in for just a little split second, he's going to put his hand around your whole heart and pull you back. And for a second, I was like, shit. Like, I don't want that to happen. I'm scared. But then I had to remind myself, like, oh, that's just the manipulation.
I'm afraid of that too sometimes.
I'm still so scared of that. And I know that if my family's listening to this, they're going to look at that as hope. Because, like, oh, if she's scared of that, that means it can still happen.
Yeah, but the reason you're scared is because you're worried that the brainwashing has a trap door to more brainwashing.
Yes.
And they don't even necessarily, like, your average Sunday school teacher doesn't know that what she's doing is a brainwashing technique.
Of course.
But it is.
It is. Like when I used to go to youth camp or...
I can't believe you liked going to those.
I loved going.
I hated that shit.
But it was so manipulative the entire time. The entire time. And in fact...
They would get you worked up emotionally.
Exactly. I loved this one band that would come play at our youth camps. The band was called Spur 58. They were from Murfreesboro, Tennessee. And one time I actually protested. I went to my association and I said, my church is not coming to youth camp unless Spur 58 is the music. And I loved them. And I had them on such a high pedestal. And I just thought that they had it all together. And I just recently found out that the lead singer, who was a pastor at a megachurch, just earlier this year was found texting little boys.
Shock.
Shock and awe. Sending pictures and explicit text messages and porn to little boys.
Oh
and God. Anytime you put somebody on a pedestal, it's usually going to
bite you in the ass.
It's going to bite you in the ass and you're going to be very, very disappointed. If your religious organization is encouraging you to put their leaders on a pedestal, I would take a long, hard look at that organization.
Yeah. I doubt anybody is listening to this who does attend church.
Oh, I disagree.
But you need to be aware that raising your children in this environment is pre-grooming your children for predators.
Yep. Happened to both of us.
Yeah, you took the work right out of it for them. When you teach your child obedience, you can't control who they will obey.
Right.
I can't stress it enough. Just because it's a church youth, like they're fine to babysit your kids, not necessarily. Vet your babysitters. Vet your deacons.
Vet your youth pastors.
Vet your youth pastors.
Yeah.
This is a hard podcast for us.
This is, yeah. No matter how healed we are, this will always be a tough topic.
As much as I have been looking forward to doing this one because I know a lot of people need to hear it, just know that these old stomping grounds are hard for us to walk over.
Yeah.
And not because we're not healed from them or we're not healing from them, but because we are thinking of all the people we left there.
And how we can't save them.
We can't save them. And all the little girls, like, I'm wondering, have they already been victimized?
And even if they haven't been touched, they've probably still been victimized.
Yes, absolutely.
Because this is something that I've never talked about publicly. I mean, you know. But the youth pastor that assaulted me started when I was 15. And I didn't realize it until after I left the church. And I was like, oh shit, that was messed up. And I was never touched until many years later, a few years later. But when I look back, I was victimized starting at 15. And it started with little things being put into my head. Like, oh, like other people in the church would be like, oh, somebody told me that God told them that you were going to marry this person who's 15 years older than me.
Yeah, gross.
And like, it started as jokes. Like, oh, haha, like as soon as you're an adult, you get to marry the youth pastor. You get to be a youth pastor's wife. Hee hee. And, you know, when so many people that you trust and respect are telling you the same thing, it's really difficult not to believe it. So we've talked about the signs and the symptoms of spiritual abuse. If you are in a spiritually abusive situation, you are going to come out of that with trauma. So now let's talk about what it looks like to heal from that spiritual trauma.
Yes. One of the big important things is acknowledging and validating your emotions. What you feel matters.
If you feel like what you experienced was inappropriate or abusive or wrong, it's because it was. And I think the number one thing that you should do is find a therapist who is not involved in that particular religion, or probably a completely agnostic therapist would be a good idea. Find a therapist who can be unbiased about the situation and talk through your feelings. If you're feeling some type of way, there's a reason for that.
Another way to work through things is to challenge the fear-based beliefs that are within you. One of the fear-based beliefs, doing wrong sends you to hell.
Yep. Having premarital sex will make you undesirable to your future husband.
Ooh, and it'll diminish you in some way.
It devalues you.
Devalues, thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. If you're not paying tithe, then whatever your tithe would have been that month, you're going to
lose
in some sort of way. Like they would always say, you'll get a hospital bill for exactly that amount. And if you do pay tithe, you will find that exact amount. It will come back to you. You know, it's just if you don't fit in their little box. I think that as you're navigating those things, it's very important to sit down and figure out what you actually believe. That would probably be the number one thing, because that was kind of the turning point for me, is when I was still in the church and I was sitting down and I was reading the Bible and I realized that I didn't think that hell existed. I was like, I don't know if I believe in hell. And so then I started reading through it, and I started reading all of these other texts that were about that, and it just started to make more sense to me. And then I realized, if hell isn't real, then what are we doing all of this for?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I can be a good person without the threat of being burned for the rest of eternity.
Surprisingly, not something everybody can say.
That's true. And finding a community is incredibly important too. Find people who have been through what you've been through so that they can help you navigate the path ahead.
Another way to work through these triggers that you have, creating a safe space and boundaries. Do you also find that you feel the need to confess random shit?
I don't confess, but I feel very guilty about things. Like, if I'm doing something that I'm quote unquote not supposed to be doing, the entire time I think every single person in the entire world knows about it. It happened to me today.
It is okay to have privacy. Being allowed to have private thoughts, being able to have secrets, privacy is okay. Engaging in healing practices is another way. Healing practices, that can be a lot of things. That can look like just taking time for yourself.
Yeah.
A big one, I mean, a healing practice is therapy, obviously.
For me, it's spending time in nature. And I think that's why I have chosen a pagan path, because when I left the church, being in nature really made me feel grounded, and it made me feel whole. And so now I think that I've kind of found myself worshiping nature in a way. But I was never an outdoors girly when I was growing up. This is a new adventure. That's a good healing practice. And then just any sort of self-care. Getting a facial, getting your hair done, going to the spa, even just allowing yourself to get up and shower.
So there's engaging in healing practices, and then there's also embracing compassion and patience for yourself.
That's the hardest part.
This is going to be difficult. You are going to be unpacking religious trauma and religious beliefs for the rest of your life. I wish I could tell you it was limited, but it is not. For me, when I left the church, I took a while before I didn't believe in God anymore. It took a little while. It started with, I don't think he's a God worthy of worship. And continued to, well, I hate him. And then went to, damn, I don't even think any of that's real.
Yeah.
And then I pushed it hard, and I was a hardcore, angry atheist. Not all atheists are angry, but I was. And I was really hardcore against religion. And I was very much about, like, if it's not perceivable through the five senses, then it's not real. Like, basically, I was putting the kibosh on anything paranormal or spiritual or whatever. And that's when you met me.
Yep.
I've always wondered what the moment was when you were fully exited from Christianity and then fully jumped into the spiritual world.
I think it was when I realized I was gay. I think that was a big one for me, because I knew growing up that I was attracted to women, but I just kind of thought that everybody felt that way. I never knew that what I was feeling was different from the majority of the population, apparently. Which still blows my fucking mind, but
yeah,
whatever. I think when I realized that who I am as a person was wrong and was hated in that religion, I think I realized that I just can't participate in something that hurts people. And it was always really hard for me to look outside of myself. And maybe that is because of how I grew up, or maybe I'm just narcissistic, I don't know. And so I completely put both feet out. Then, once I did that, I started thinking about spirituality in a different way. And then I wanted to explore other ways to be spiritual that didn't isolate me and my identity. And then I found spirituality, and then I never looked back. What about you?
I'm going to be honest, I didn't jump in with both feet until 2021.
Yeah, that's true.
I just wasn't sure that I was willing to say again that I believed in anything.
Yeah.
I just never was really sure about what you did about talking to people who had passed on, and I was never really sure if there was an afterlife. I wanted to believe it really, really badly, but I just didn't know that I was ready to let myself. And then in 2021, my friend's mom died. It was my first time recognizing an energy. I didn't just feel an energy and know that something was there. I knew who it was.
Yep.
Somebody who had just been here in life was now here in death.
Yeah.
Speaking to me. And that was when I was like, okay, I'm in. I believe it now. And I've never turned since that day.
It's interesting when you have a personal spiritual experience like that. It really reframes everything that you experienced in religion.
Yes.
Because there were times where I had a spiritual experience at church camp, at church, during youth group. There were times where I was like, yes, I feel the presence of God. But then when you leave religion and you have an experience and it's the exact same feeling,
yes,
but you know that it's not the biblical God, you're like, oh, I've been connected to the universe this entire time. It was
Yes.
just called something different. Once you have that experience, there's no going back. And I think that realizing that helped me to have more sympathy towards Christians, because I was very angry for a very long time.
Me too.
You go through all the stages of grief, and anger lasted a very long time for me.
If their version of belief has them in a happy and healthy place,
Yeah.
then good for them. There are some non-toxic Christian entities out there.
Yes.
There are non-toxic Christian people out there.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, like as is with most things in the world, there are
Bad apples.
bad apples, and they're the loud ones.
Unfortunately.
It took me a long time to not hate everything about Christianity, including Jesus.
Yeah.
Like when I met my friend who became my mentor, she would use the word divine all the time, and it would trigger me like crazy, and I would just tense up, and she'd be talking fondly about Jesus and using the word divine and all this stuff, and I'm like, how can she be so enlightened and still like make room for this stuff, you know? And meeting her helped me heal my heart from the giant gaping hateful wound that I had there festering this whole time. And I've seen you going through your healing journey, healing one piece at a time.
Yeah.
You know, and like you're less triggered now by certain things than you were before. And I'm a few years ahead of you. And so I know that your journey is just going to keep shifting and keep changing. And
that healing it's intense. And it's interesting to look at who we are now versus who we were when we were in the church, and even when we had first left the church. So sometimes I like to think about, what would 16-year-old Alicia think about 36-year-old Alicia? And I think that she would be terrified. But I can say with all honesty and with 100% certainty that I am so much happier now. I'm so much less angry. I used to be angry at everything because I had this superiority complex where I thought I was better than everybody else because I had this relationship with God, and I never really had a relationship with God. I had a relationship with the church, and that's very, very different. I was severely depressed and anxious. My stomach hurt all the time. I got myself into situations with boys and men that were very dangerous and physically and mentally and emotionally damaging. I let people control me, and I had not a sliver of independence. And now, if 16-year-old me could see me, she would be very intimidated.
I can tell you beyond a shadow of a doubt that if 16-year-old me could look into the future and see where we're at right now, I would undeniably kill myself.
For sure.
Like, I used to think about things like this when I was that age. And I thought, if I knew that I would walk away from God one day, I would kill myself before I could do it.
Yep.
And that's the kind of fervor they raise you to be. Like,
and they praise
have.
that.
They do.
Yeah.
That makes me so sad for that version of myself. to be so against any experience other than the one I was told I was allowed to have, that I would actually do that.
That's why you and I have been put on this earth in this timeline to go through this. We went through all of our religious experiences so that we can help people navigate coming out of that. I mean, people come to us from all different religious backgrounds, and we can hold space for them and say, I know what you're going through is hard and confusing and scary, but look at us. And that's what you did for me.
Yeah.
When I was coming out of Christianity, you said, what are you scared of? And I was like, well, I'm scared that something bad is going to happen. And you said, I've been out of this for years and nothing bad has happened to me. More bad happened to me in the church than has ever happened to me outside of the church.
And that's still true.
Incredibly true.
Like 7 to 8 years later, that's still true.
The worst thing that ever happened to me in my life happened in the name of God by the youth pastor in my church. And the entire time was telling me, this is what God told me to do. And if you don't like it, it's because you're not close enough to God. And it's because you don't understand how to be a good Christian and how to be a servant to the Lord. Because that's something that you're always scared about, is making God mad and how he will smite you. Living outside of that is so freeing. If I was in the church still, I just don't think it's in me to be obedient. I don't think I have it in me. And I think that I would have really, really ruined some lives if I was forced to do that. First of all, I'm never going to let a man tell me anything. Surprisingly, I learned that from my mom, who is a Christian, but she never let a man tell her anything.
Mine was the opposite.
I think that I knew very, very young that it wasn't for me. And I just didn't allow myself to believe it until many, many years later. Even though it was hard, I'm glad that you and I went through what we did so that we can help other people navigate this journey, because it is a very hard one. It's very scary and it's isolating. And I think that you feel like there's something lurking around every corner, just either waiting to harm you, to prove to you that you're on a wrong path, or to pull you back into Christianity so violently that you get whiplash. There are still times where I think like, ugh, I'm scared.
I just want you to know that if the Holy Ghost tries to retrieve you,
you're not letting me go.
He's not getting through me.
Well, let's tell everybody the April Fool's joke that you played on me a couple of years ago. Because that was a dirty, dirty trick.
That was so mean.
That was so mean, because I was like,
man.
and I went right into therapist mode.
You did.
So Abby texted me on April 1st. This was what, 3 years ago maybe?
Yeah. I found the messages.
Okay.
I found the messages.
Okay, read them.
I had a dream last night. It was intense, and now I'm all in my head wondering if I did the right thing when I abandoned God. I'm rethinking my entire life.
And I was like, okay, Abby's having a psychotic break. So I text her back and I said, hey, where's Matt?
And then I texted and I said, you're going to hate me for this, ... April Fools. You said I was about to call Matt and ask what we need to do for you. Ha ha ha. Because clearly you were in psychosis.
Yeah, I was so scared. I was like, uh-oh, I have to save my friend.
Oh my word. I was so excited to do that to you. And I know it's like, I knew it was only a joke I could do one time.
Yeah.
You know?
It's never going to get me again.
No.
If you are going through a deconstruction journey, just know that we got your back and we've been there. Abby, I think that you know the Bible better than 99.9% of Christians that I know. And so Abby can explain
because
I've
read it multiple times and I studied it for years.
Yeah. And I decided to dump all of that out of my brain when I left because it didn't serve me anymore. And if you are deciding to leave religion, even if you don't want to fall into spirituality, even if you just want to live your life as an atheist or an agnostic, we can help you get out without trying to pull you into something else.
Yeah,
So
even if you just need to talk it over with somebody.
we don't want to recruit. We don't want to evangelize anymore.
We're
need tired. We don't need to. The right people will find us. We don't have to preach to anybody. Plus, we're not a religion. So
if somebody has to convince you to follow it, it's probably not that good.
Right. Or it's probably not for you.
Yeah.
So as always, we're here to hold space for you at any part of your journey.
This has been Mystic's Guide to the Universe. See you next time.
Bye.